My boyfriend texted, "I want a divorce, all communication through my lawyer." I replied, "Understood." Then I canceled his credit cards and cut all financial support. 72 hours later, his lawyer was frantically calling me. "My name is Hannah Carter. I'm 42 years old, and if you had asked me 3 days ago what the end of a 15-year relationship would look like, I would have said something loud, something dramatic. Maybe a fight in the kitchen, voices raised, dishes slammed into the sink." Instead, it ended with a text message. I was sitting at my desk Tuesday afternoon, deep inside a spreadsheet that refused to balance. Numbers tend to calm me down. They're predictable, logical. If something doesn't add up, there's always a reason. People, unfortunately, don't follow the same rules. My phone buzzed once against the desk. Daniel Mercer, my boyfriend of 15 years. I glanced at the screen absent-mindedly, expecting something mundane. Maybe a question about dinner. Maybe a reminder to grab groceries. Instead, I saw the message. "Hannah, I want a divorce. Please direct all future communication through my lawyer, Mr. Peterson. His contact details will follow." I stared at the screen for a long time, probably 5 minutes. Shock is strange. People expect screaming, crying, some kind of emotional explosion. What I felt instead was quiet, a slow, cold clarity. The night before had been completely normal. We had eaten dinner together, talked about the weekend, discussed a movie Daniel wanted to watch. Nothing in his voice hinted that 15 years were about to evaporate through a text message. And yet there it was. I read the message again and again. Every time the words looked the same, I leaned back in my chair and let out a slow breath. Underneath the calm surface, the emotions were definitely there. Hurt, confusion, anger. But those feelings sat somewhere deep below the surface, like a storm moving beneath the ocean. On the surface, everything was still. Daniel had made one thing very clear. Lawyers only. No discussion, no explanation, no conversation. Just legal channels. Fine. I typed my response. Understood. Then I put my phone down and started handling the logistics. Daniel had always been the emotional one in our relationship. He reacted first and thought later. I was the opposite. When something collapsed, I organized the debris. Our finances had always been semi-separate. I learned that lesson from watching my parents tear each other apart during their divorce. They fought over every dollar like it was oxygen. So when Daniel and I moved in together years ago, I suggested something different. Separate personal accounts. Shared responsibility for major expenses. Practical. Clean. But there were still overlaps. Daniel had supplementary credit cards connected to my accounts. Not joint ownership, just authorized user status. Convenient. Until Tuesday. I opened my banking app. The screen glowed softly on my phone. Tap. Credit card management. Tap. Authorized users. Daniel's name appeared on 2 accounts. For a moment, I just looked at it. 15 years is a long time to see someone's name next to yours. Then I selected the first card. Cancel authorized user. Confirm. Done. Second card. Cancel. Confirm. Done. 2 taps and Daniel no longer had access to those accounts. Next was the monthly transfer. For years, I had transferred him a fixed amount each month into his personal account. It was originally meant for discretionary spending. His freelance projects were inconsistent, and this made things easier. I logged into my bank, found the recurring transfer, cancel automatic payment, effective immediately. Next, streaming subscriptions, Netflix, Prime, Spotify, all under my name. I logged out of every connected device except the one sitting in my hand. Then I changed the passwords. If Daniel wanted those services now, he could buy them himself. None of this felt like revenge. It felt like administration. Daniel had drawn a line the moment he sent that message. Lawyers only. Informal arrangements didn't belong in that world. My phone buzzed again. An email notification. Daniel had sent the contact information for his lawyer, Mr. Alan Peterson. I read the email once, then forwarded it immediately to Victoria Cole. Victoria was a divorce attorney, a colleague recommended months ago during a casual conversation about legal preparedness. I had saved her contact information back then, hoping I would never need it. Life has a strange sense of timing. My message to her was short. Received text from partner demanding divorce and lawyer-only communication. Need immediate counsel regarding asset protection and next steps. Please advise retainer. I hit send. Then I closed the banking apps. Total time elapsed, about 30 minutes. 30 minutes to dismantle the financial structure of a 15-year relationship. The rest of the afternoon passed in a strange haze. I finished the spreadsheet I had been working on earlier, sent the report to my manager, answered a few emails. Everything felt slightly unreal, like I was watching my life from across the room. When I finally drove home that evening, the sky was already dark. Our house sat quietly at the end of the street. the porch light glowing the way it always did. But something felt different the moment I walked through the door. Too quiet. The air inside felt hollow. I stepped into the living room. Daniel's coat was gone from the rack. His shoes were missing from beside the door. The shelf where he usually kept his camera equipment sat half empty. He must have packed while I was at work. No note, no message, just absence. I stood there for a while in the middle of the living room, listening to the quiet settle around me. 15 years together. Gone in less than a day. Oddly enough, I slept well that night. Maybe exhaustion, maybe shock. Or maybe part of me had already accepted something my conscious mind hadn't caught up to yet. Either way, the next morning came like any other. Coffee, shower, work. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Until Friday afternoon. 72 hours after Daniel's text. My phone rang. Unknown number. I stared at it for a moment before answering. Something told me exactly who it was. Hello? A sharp voice came through the speaker. Is this Hannah Carter? Yes. This is Mr. Peterson. I represent Daniel Mercer. Of course he did. My client, he continued, his voice tight with irritation, is currently experiencing some financial difficulties. I leaned back in my chair slowly. Okay. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said bluntly, his credit cards have been declined. The monthly funds he receives from you were abruptly terminated. This situation is highly irregular, Ms. Carter. For a moment, I simply listened to him. Then I answered calmly. Mr. Peterson, Daniel sent me a message Tuesday requesting a divorce and stating that all future communication must go through you. Yes, I'm aware. I acknowledged his request and complied, I continued evenly. Informal financial arrangements ceased when he terminated the relationship and established legal representation. Silence, then paper shuffling. My client requires funds immediately, Peterson said stiffly, for necessities, accommodation. That made me pause. Accommodation? I asked. Yes. I frowned slightly. Where is he staying? A brief hesitation. That isn't pertinent, but the hesitation had already told me everything. Daniel Mercer, who had detonated a 15-year relationship through a text message, was apparently now sleeping on someone else's couch. Peterson's voice hardened. You acted in bad faith, cutting him off without warning. I felt my pulse start to quicken, but my voice stayed steady. My boyfriend unilaterally ended our relationship via text and demanded lawyer-only communication, I said calmly. Financial matters will now be addressed legally through counsel. Another long pause. My client will be filing for emergency financial relief. That's his prerogative. And you will cooperate? Of course, I said. Please direct all filings to my attorney, Victoria Cole. You have her contact information? Yes. Excellent, I replied. Then our conversation is concluded according to Daniel's instructions. I paused briefly. Good day, Mr. Peterson. Then I hung up. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the phone in my hand. My heart was pounding now. The adrenaline had finally arrived. But underneath the rush of nerves, another feeling settled quietly into place. Validation. Daniel had wanted cold. He had wanted legal. He had wanted distance. Now he was getting exactly what he asked for. And somehow I had a feeling this was only the beginning. I didn't hear from Daniel again that day. Not directly. Which technically was consistent with the rule he had created. Lawyers only. The strange thing about crises is how quickly your mind adapts once the first shock fades. By Friday evening, the situation had already shifted from emotional confusion into something more structured. A problem, with moving pieces. And like any complex problem, the only way to deal with it was step by step. Victoria Cole called me about an hour after my conversation with Mr. Peterson. Her voice was calm, direct, and exactly what I needed. I read the message Daniel sent you, she said. You handled the initial response correctly. That's good to hear, I replied. His lawyer sounded irritated. Victoria let out a soft laugh. He's irritated because your boyfriend expected the financial structure of a relationship while simultaneously terminating the relationship itself. That sounds about right. She explained the situation clearly. Daniel's message had established a legal boundary. Once he demanded lawyer-only communication, the informal agreements that existed inside our relationship no longer had any practical framework. Everything now moved through legal channels, which meant something very simple. If Daniel needed financial support, it would be negotiated through attorneys and the court, not through emotional phone calls. Document everything, Victoria said before ending the call. Every message, every attempt to contact you, every financial change, it all matters. I already had. That night, I started a folder on my laptop. Divorce documentation. Inside it, I saved screenshots. Daniel's text. The email from his lawyer. Bank confirmations showing when the supplementary cards were canceled. The canceled transfer. Timestamps. Dates. Clean records. Numbers and evidence had always been my comfort zone. And something about organizing the situation helped steady my mind. But the quiet didn't last long. Monday morning arrived like a storm front. Victoria called again before I even reached my office. "They filed," she said. "Emergency temporary support?" "Yes." I closed my eyes briefly. "That was fast." "Not unusual," she said. "But the amount they requested is ambitious." "How ambitious?" She told me the number. I actually laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. More the kind that escapes when something is so absurd your brain rejects it. "They want me to fund his previous lifestyle," I said slowly. "Plus housing," Victoria added. "And legal fees." "That too." Daniel wasn't asking for survival money. He was asking for a continuation of the life he had when we were together. The same restaurants, the same spending, the same comfortable existence, just without me. Victoria thankfully had already responded. She filed a counter-proposal the same day. Temporary support based strictly on basic needs, not discretionary spending. She also included 2 key facts. First, Daniel had left the house voluntarily. Second, Daniel had demanded lawyer-only communication, which triggered the financial restructuring. The message was clear. He had detonated the relationship. Now he had to live inside the consequences. I thought that would be the end of the noise for a few days. I was wrong. Wednesday night, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I hadn't seen in a while. Megan, Daniel's best friend. I hesitated before answering. Part of me hoped she might offer clarity, maybe even an explanation. "Hello? Hannah, what the hell did you do?" No greeting. No hesitation. Just anger. "Megan," I said slowly. "Don't Megan me," she snapped. "Daniel is sleeping on my couch because you cut him off." That answered the question I had asked Mr. Peterson earlier. Accommodation. "So that's where he is," I said quietly. "Yes," she said. "And he couldn't even buy groceries this week because his card stopped working." "Megan," I replied, keeping my voice level, "Daniel sent me a message demanding divorce and lawyer-only communication." "You know he barely works." Daniel had always done freelance graphic design. Sometimes the projects came in waves. Sometimes they didn't. The monthly transfers I sent had smoothed those gaps for years. "How is he supposed to live?" Megan demanded. "He hired a lawyer before speaking to me," I said. "Financial matters now go through the lawyers he insisted on." "You're being cruel." That word hung in the air for a moment. Cruel. I leaned back against the couch and closed my eyes briefly. "Megan," I said finally, "was hiring Mr. Peterson also a mistake?" Silence. A long one. When she spoke again, her voice was softer. "He's scared." I was blindsided, I replied. "He didn't mean it like that." "He sent a lawyer before a conversation." Another silence. Then Megan sighed heavily. "He deserves support. You always took care of him." "I would have discussed things calmly," I said, "if he hadn't ended the relationship through a legal threat." "You're really going to do this through the courts?" "Yes. He's going to take everything from you," she snapped suddenly. I almost smiled. "He can try." The calmness in my voice seemed to irritate her even more. "You're unbelievable," she muttered. "I'm following the process Daniel chose." "That's cold." "Maybe," I said. Then I added quietly, "But it's fair." She hung up shortly after that. The call left me sitting in silence for a few minutes. Not because I doubted my decision, but because the narrative forming around me was becoming clearer. Daniel was telling people a story. In that story, he was the victim, and I was the woman who abandoned him without warning. But reality had a way of revealing itself in unexpected places. The next morning, I received a fraud alert from my bank, an attempted withdrawal from an account I had almost completely forgotten about. Years ago, Daniel and I had opened a joint savings account for a vacation fund. We stopped using it ages ago. There had been about $500 left inside. Apparently, Daniel had found the old debit card. He attempted to withdraw the entire balance. The bank flagged the transaction immediately because the account had been dormant for years. I drove to the branch during lunch, explained the situation, showed them the pending divorce documentation. They froze the account pending legal agreement. When I told Victoria about the incident later that day, she sounded almost pleased. "That actually helps us," she said. "How?" "It shows he isn't just passively waiting for court decisions. He's actively trying to move money outside the legal process." I thought about Daniel standing at an ATM somewhere, trying to drain a forgotten account. Not for the money. $500 wouldn't change anything. It was the principle, the attempt. And suddenly the entire situation felt different. This wasn't just an emotional breakup anymore. It was becoming a legal battlefield. The court scheduled the emergency support hearing for the following week. Daniel was still sleeping on Megan's couch. His lawyer was still accusing me of acting in bad faith. But the deeper the situation unfolded, the more something about Daniel's story stopped making sense. And I had a feeling that once the judge saw the full picture, things were going to change very quickly. 3 weeks after Daniel's text message, we finally stood in the same room again. A courtroom. Not a kitchen, not a living room, not the house we had shared for 15 years. A courtroom. The air inside felt cool and strangely quiet, the way official buildings always do. Fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. People spoke in low voices that echoed faintly against the high ceilings. I arrived early with Victoria. She carried a slim leather folder that contained everything we needed: printed bank records, screenshots, timelines, financial summaries, months of relationship logistics reduced to neat stacks of paper. Daniel walked in about 10 minutes later. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked thinner, more tired than I remembered. His hair was messier than usual, like he'd been running his hands through it too often. He saw me, then quickly looked away. Mr. Peterson walked beside him, already speaking in a low voice, pointing at documents. Daniel nodded without really listening. For a second, something inside my chest tightened. 15 years is a long time to erase. But the moment passed. Victoria leaned slightly toward me. "Stay calm," she whispered. "This hearing is only about temporary support, nothing permanent." I know. Still, seeing Daniel again made the situation feel more real than it had through emails and legal filings. A clerk called our case. We stepped forward. The judge was an older man with silver hair and a tired expression that suggested he had seen every possible version of divorce drama before. Mr. Peterson spoke first. He painted a dramatic picture. Daniel had been financially dependent on me for years. My sudden termination of financial support had left him unable to afford housing, unable to buy groceries, unable to maintain stability. Peterson even used the word destitute. Daniel sat beside him, staring at the desk. Victoria didn't interrupt. She simply waited until it was her turn. Then she stood. "Your Honor," she said calmly. The situation began with a written message sent by Mr. Mercer. She handed the judge a printed copy. The judge adjusted his glasses and read silently. His eyebrows lifted slightly. "Mr. Mercer," he said, looking up, "you sent this?" Daniel shifted in his seat. "Yes." The judge read the line aloud. "I want a divorce, all communication through my lawyer." Then he looked back at Daniel. "So you initiated the divorce?" "Yes." "And you instructed that all communication be handled through legal counsel?" Daniel nodded again. Victoria spoke again. "My client complied with Mr. Mercer's instructions immediately. She acknowledged his request and transitioned all financial matters to legal channels." She handed the judge the next set of documents. Bank records showing that Mr. Mercer held supplementary credit cards attached to my client's accounts. Those cards were canceled after the message. Peterson tried to interrupt. "Your Honor, financial status quo is typically maintained during separation." The judge held up a hand. "I'm aware of standard practice." He continued reviewing the documents. Victoria added another piece of evidence. Additionally, Mr. Mercer attempted to withdraw funds from a dormant joint account after initiating legal proceedings. Another document. Bank report. Fraud alert. The judge glanced toward Daniel again. "Is that correct?" Daniel cleared his throat. "I thought it was still ours." "It contained $500, the judge said dryly. Daniel didn't respond. Victoria continued, still calm. "My client continues to pay the mortgage on the marital home, utilities, vehicle lease, and insurance. Mr. Mercer's claim of destitution does not reflect the full financial picture." Then she presented the final piece. Daniel's income statement. Freelance design earnings. Not large, but not zero. Peterson tried again. "My client has been emotionally distressed and unable to maintain full work capacity." The judge looked unimpressed. Then he asked the question that changed the room. "Mr. Mercer, why did you demand lawyer-only communication before discussing finances with Ms. Carter?" Daniel shifted again. "I felt intimidated." For the first time since the hearing began, I almost laughed. Not out loud. But the absurdity of the moment was difficult to ignore. The judge didn't laugh, but his expression told me exactly what he thought. He leaned back slightly. "Temporary support will be granted," he said after a moment. Peterson looked relieved. Then the judge continued. "However, the amount will reflect basic living expenses only." Peterson's relief faded immediately. No discretionary spending, no continuation of prior lifestyle. He looked directly at Daniel. "Your own decision to initiate divorce through legal counsel without prior discussion contributed significantly to your current situation." The gavel tapped once. Decision made. The amount ordered was far closer to Victoria's number than Peterson's. Enough for food, enough for a small apartment if Daniel found one, but nothing close to the lifestyle he had asked for. The hearing ended quickly after that. People began filing out of the courtroom. Daniel stood slowly beside Peterson. For a moment, our eyes met across the room. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Frustration, embarrassment, maybe disbelief, like he genuinely hadn't expected things to go this way. Victoria packed the documents back into her folder. "That went well," she said quietly. "Yes." But as we walked toward the exit, a strange thought crossed my mind. Something about Daniel's behavior felt incomplete, like the story he was telling people didn't fully match the actions he was taking. And that suspicion proved correct sooner than I expected. Because 2 days later, my phone rang again. This time it wasn't Daniel. And it wasn't his lawyer. It was human resources from my company. Someone had filed an anonymous complaint about me, accusing me of misusing company resources for personal legal matters, and suggesting my recent behavior showed signs of professional instability. I stared at the phone after the call ended. The accusation was absurd. Every email I sent regarding the divorce had been through my personal devices. Every legal call happened outside work hours, which meant only one thing. Someone wasn't trying to win the divorce anymore. They were trying to destroy my life around it. And if that was the direction Daniel wanted to take things, then the next phase of this divorce was about to become much more serious. The call from Human Resources happened on a Thursday morning. For a moment, when my phone rang and I saw the company number, I assumed it was something routine, maybe a scheduling issue, maybe an internal audit question. Nothing unusual. Then the HR representative cleared her throat and said carefully, "Hannah, we received an anonymous complaint regarding potential misuse of company resources." That got my attention. "What kind of misuse?" I asked. The pause on the other end of the line was deliberate. "The report alleges you may have been using company systems to manage personal legal matters." It also mentioned erratic behavior affecting workplace stability. I actually blinked. Erratic behavior? For a moment, I didn't even know how to respond. The idea was so far from reality that my brain struggled to process it. "I see," I said slowly. "Don't worry," she added quickly. "This is standard procedure. We simply verify." Within an hour, they had already checked. Company email logs, system activity. Nothing. Every message related to the divorce had come from my personal phone or laptop. Every call happened outside work hours. My manager stopped by my office later that afternoon. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, expression half amused. "You good?" "I think so." "HR showed me the complaint," he said. "Pretty vague." "What did it say?" "Something about you being emotionally unstable due to personal circumstances." I almost laughed. "That's a new one." He shook his head. "Logs show nothing. You're one of the most methodical people in this department." "Good to know." The complaint was dismissed within the day, but the message behind it was impossible to ignore. Someone had tried to damage my career. When I told Victoria about the incident that evening, she made a note immediately. "Add it to the documentation," she said. "You think it came from Daniel?" "We can't prove that," she replied, "but the timing matters. Courts pay attention to patterns of harassment." Patterns. The word stuck with me, because the HR complaint wasn't the only attempt at pressure. 2 nights later, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID made my stomach tighten. Daniel's mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the divorce text. Not once. I debated letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. "Hannah?" Her voice was already shaking. "How could you do this to him?" No greeting. No small talk. Just accusation. "Mrs. Mercer?" "Daniel is struggling," she interrupted, her voice rising. "He told me everything. You cut him off with nothing." I closed my eyes for a second. "Daniel initiated the divorce," I said calmly. "He was emotional. He hired a lawyer before speaking to me." "You were together 15 years, she said. "How can you be so heartless?" There it was again. Heartless. Cruel. Cold. Words people like to use when logic replaces emotion. "He asked for lawyer-only communication," I replied. "Financial matters are now handled through attorneys. You could still help him." The words carried a strange mixture of anger and pleading. "Think about the years he gave you." I exhaled slowly. "Mrs. Mercer," I said quietly, "Daniel chose this process." She began crying. Real tears, or very convincing ones. "He's terrified," she whispered. For a moment, something inside me softened. But then another thought pushed through. Daniel had never once called to explain. Never apologized. Never even tried to talk. He had sent a lawyer. And now his family wanted me to undo the consequences. "I'm sorry he's having a difficult time," I said finally. "But the lawyers will handle everything." She called me cold. Then she hung up. The emotional pressure was exhausting. But it also clarified something important. Daniel and the people around him genuinely believed I would eventually give in. That I would feel guilty. That I would restore the financial support voluntarily. And that belief explained the next phase of the legal strategy. Victoria called me Monday morning. "We're making a few adjustments," she said. "What kind?" "The car." Daniel had been driving a leased SUV. The lease was in my name. The insurance was in my name. The payments came from my account. Until now, I had continued paying it to avoid complications during the early stage of the divorce. But the court had now established temporary support, which meant Daniel was responsible for managing his own transportation. Victoria had already sent the letter to Mr. Peterson. Daniel had two options: either qualify for a lease transfer in his own name, or return the vehicle. I stopped stirring my coffee. What if he does neither? Victoria's voice remained calm. Then the leasing company repossesses it. The simplicity of the answer was almost startling. Divorce law, I was learning, was surprisingly logical once emotions were removed. But the car wasn't the only step. We're also filing for exclusive use of the house, she continued. Because he left. Yes, and the judge didn't grant it to him. Correct. The house would likely be sold eventually. But establishing legal control early prevented future arguments. Then came the most important move. Financial discovery, Victoria said. I leaned forward. You think he's hiding something? I don't assume, she replied. I verify. Financial discovery meant something very specific. Daniel would be legally required to disclose all bank accounts, investments, assets, income streams, everything. And if he tried to hide something, that could become a serious problem for him in court. Transparency cuts both ways, Victoria said. And we also start documenting the harassment, the HR complaint, the calls from his family, the pressure, all logged. Date, time, summary. Because in divorce court, patterns mattered. Bad faith mattered. And slowly, quietly, the legal battlefield was shifting. But the most surprising moment came the next evening, when my phone buzzed with a text message from Daniel. The first direct contact since his original message. The screen lit up with his words. Hannah, you can't take the car. How am I supposed to get anywhere? This is getting ridiculous. Stop this. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I took a screenshot, sent it directly to Victoria, and finally typed my response. Daniel, per your instructions dated Tuesday, all communication goes through our lawyers. Please contact Mr. Peterson. I pressed send. A minute passed. 2, 5. No response. Just silence, which told me everything I needed to know. Daniel had wanted this process to be legal when he thought it would protect him. Now that the same rules applied to him, he suddenly didn't like them very much. And something told me the next phase of this divorce was going to reveal far more than either of us expected. Divorce changes the way you look at people. For 15 years, Daniel had been a familiar landscape. I knew the way he drank his coffee, the way he hummed when he was working, the way he always forgot where he left his keys. But during financial discovery, the person I thought I knew slowly dissolved into paperwork. Victoria warned me it would feel strange. She was right. The discovery process forced both of us to open every financial drawer in our lives. Bank accounts, credit cards, investment portfolios, retirement funds. Every dollar had to be explained. Every asset documented. The court expected transparency, and transparency has a way of revealing things people forget to mention. The first few disclosures from Daniel looked normal. Freelance income statements, a checking account with modest savings, some credit card balances. Nothing unusual. But Victoria wasn't satisfied. She studied the documents the way a forensic accountant might study a crime scene. Quietly, patiently. Then one afternoon she called me. I found something interesting. What kind of interesting? A second savings account. My stomach tightened slightly. Hidden? Not exactly hidden, she said, but conveniently omitted from his first disclosure. The account had existed for years. According to the records, Daniel's parents had occasionally deposited money there. Birthday gifts, holiday contributions, small transfers that accumulated slowly over time. There were also a few shares of inherited stock tied to the account. Not millions, but not insignificant either. What does that mean legally? I asked. It depends on how the money was handled. She explained the concept carefully. If the funds had remained completely separate, never mixed with our shared finances, Daniel could argue they were separate property. But if any of that money had been transferred into joint accounts or used for shared expenses, it became marital property, which meant it was subject to division. Victoria's voice carried a quiet satisfaction. Some of the transfers were commingled. How much? Enough. For the first time since the divorce began, the story Daniel had been telling people started to collapse under its own weight. The narrative of the helpless boyfriend who had been financially abandoned no longer fit, because the documents showed something very different. Daniel had resources. He simply preferred not to use them, and the timing couldn't have been worse for him. Because the next conflict exploded over the car. Daniel still hadn't returned it, and he hadn't qualified for the lease transfer either. Victoria had given Mr. Peterson a clear deadline. 30 days. Either Daniel assumed responsibility for the vehicle, or the leasing company would take it back. The deadline passed. Nothing happened. No lease transfer. No returned vehicle. So the next step happened automatically. I stopped making the payments. 2 weeks later, the leasing company called. They had located the car, parked on a quiet residential street, outside Megan's apartment building. The repossession happened early in the morning. A tow truck, paperwork, and suddenly the SUV Daniel had been driving for years was gone. I found out about it later that afternoon. Not from the leasing company, from Megan. My phone exploded with missed calls. 7 of them. Then a voicemail. Hannah, what the hell is wrong with you? They took the car. Daniel had no warning. I listened to the message once, then forwarded it to Victoria. Another entry in the documentation log. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. Daniel's mother this time. Then Megan again. Then another unknown number. I didn't answer any of them, because the situation was no longer emotional. It was procedural. Daniel had been given options. He had ignored them. Now the consequences were unfolding exactly as the law predicted. Meanwhile, the house situation moved forward quietly in the background. The judge granted temporary exclusive use of the property to me. Since Daniel had already left, it was mostly a formality. But it mattered legally. It allowed us to begin the next stage. Valuation. Realtors came through the house. Photographs were taken. Market assessments prepared. The likely outcome was obvious. The house would be sold. The equity divided. Daniel tried to fight it. His lawyer argued that he was economically disadvantaged and deserved a larger share. Victoria countered with financial records. The hidden account. The commingled funds. The attempted withdrawal from the dormant account. Piece by piece, the narrative shifted. The more documents surfaced, the less sympathy Daniel's arguments seemed to generate. But the real turning point came during the final financial review. Because Daniel's attorney had insisted earlier that the hidden savings and stocks were separate property. Untouchable. Victoria disagreed. She presented the transfer history, money moving between accounts, funds used for shared expenses, investment dividends deposited into joint accounts. The evidence created something Daniel hadn't anticipated, a legal gray area. And gray areas tend to make judges impatient. As the next hearing approached, Victoria called me with an update. The judge is losing patience. With who? With delay tactics. Daniel had rejected several reasonable settlement offers. Each one dragged the case further toward a full trial. And trials are expensive, especially for the person whose arguments keep weakening. But Daniel still seemed convinced he could win. Or maybe he simply couldn't accept what the situation had become, because the truth was now painfully clear. The story he had told at the beginning, about being abandoned and financially destroyed, was falling apart under the weight of evidence. And when the final pretrial meeting arrived, the judge made something very clear. If the case continued toward trial and Daniel lost, he could end up paying far more than he expected, which meant the final stage of this divorce was about to arrive. Whether Daniel liked it or not, by the time the divorce was finalized, 7 months had passed since Daniel's text message, 7 months of legal emails, 7 months of paperwork, 7 months of quiet, methodical trench warfare. Some days felt endless. Others passed so quickly I barely noticed. But the strange thing about long conflicts is that eventually the chaos settles into a rhythm. You stop reacting emotionally. You start thinking strategically. And once that shift happens, the outcome becomes easier to predict. Daniel and Mr. Peterson delayed as long as they could. Settlement offers came and went. Victoria drafted proposals that were reasonable, balanced, and clean. Daniel rejected most of them, sometimes without explanation, sometimes with new demands attached. The pattern became obvious. He still believed the system would eventually force me to restore the life he used to have. The problem was that every week the evidence told a different story. The repossessed car hadn't helped his argument. Neither had the hidden savings account. And the anonymous HR complaint, while impossible to prove directly, had left an unpleasant shadow hanging over his behavior in the case. By the time we reached the pre-trial conference, the judge's patience had visibly worn thin. Courtrooms have a particular silence when a judge is annoyed. The lawyers feel it first, then the clients. Mr. Peterson presented another request for increased temporary support. Victoria responded with a stack of updated financial records, income statements, asset summaries, Daniel's disclosed accounts. The judge skimmed the documents slowly. Then he looked directly at Daniel. Mr. Mercer, he said, his voice flat, this case has been pending for several months. Daniel shifted slightly. Yes, Your Honor. You rejected multiple settlement offers. Daniel nodded. The judge tapped the documents with his pen. Yet the financial disclosures do not appear to support the claims you've made about economic hardship. The room went quiet. Mr. Peterson tried to speak. Your Honor, my client's transition has been... The judge raised his hand. I am not interested in emotional narratives. His eyes returned to Daniel. I am interested in facts. Another pause. Then the judge leaned back in his chair. If this matter proceeds to trial and the evidence continues in this direction, he said slowly, the outcome may not be favorable to you. No one said anything, but the meaning was clear. Trials are risky. And judges don't usually issue warnings unless they believe one side is walking into a very bad decision. The hearing ended shortly afterward. Outside the courtroom, Victoria turned to me. "He heard the message," she said quietly. "Daniel?" "Yes." "And?" "He'll think about it." Apparently he did, because 2 weeks later, Mr. Peterson contacted Victoria. They wanted to settle. The negotiations moved quickly after that, almost surprisingly quickly. The final agreement looked very different from Daniel's original demands. The house was sold. The equity divided almost 50-50. But the financial discovery had created one adjustment. Because Daniel's hidden savings and stock accounts had partially commingled with marital funds, a portion of those assets was included in the division. Not everything, but enough to shift the numbers slightly in my favor. Daniel kept the remainder of his personal savings, which meant the narrative of him being left with nothing quietly disappeared from the paperwork. Then came the issue of spousal support. Daniel had originally requested long-term support that would essentially maintain his previous lifestyle. That didn't survive negotiations. The final order granted rehabilitative alimony for 2 years, enough to help him stabilize, enough to give him time to increase his income, but nowhere close to the open-ended financial support he had asked for. Victoria considered it a strong outcome. And perhaps most importantly, each side paid their own legal fees. In divorce court, that matters more than most people realize. The judge signed the final paperwork 1 month later. Just like that, 15 years ended in a quiet courtroom signature. No dramatic moment, no final confrontation, just ink on paper. Daniel moved into a small apartment across town. I heard about it indirectly through mutual acquaintances. Apparently, he had started taking more freelance projects, working longer hours, complaining about money. Megan, the friend whose couch he had been sleeping on at the beginning of the divorce, eventually grew distant. Living with someone during a messy breakup tends to test even strong friendships. His parents still helped him occasionally. At least that was the rumor. As for Daniel himself, there was no apology, no explanation, no attempt at closure. From what I heard, he still seemed confused about why things had turned out the way they did. As if he genuinely believed the outcome should have been different. Maybe he thought I would panic. Maybe he thought guilt would make me restore the financial support. Maybe he thought the legal system would simply hand him the life he had before. But reality rarely works that way. As for me, the 7 months were exhausting, expensive, emotionally draining in ways I hadn't expected. But when the final paperwork was signed, something surprising happened. Peace, the kind that arrives when a long chapter finally closes. I kept my job. I kept my integrity. I kept my share of the life I had built. The house was gone, but the silence in my new place felt calm instead of empty. I started going to the gym again. Met friends Daniel had never liked. Spent quiet evenings reading without tension in the air. There was no dramatic revenge, no cinematic victory moment, just the steady outcome of choices meeting consequences. Daniel had wanted everything to be formal, everything to be legal, everything handled through lawyers. And in the end, that was exactly what he got.